Hi everyone. Just giving people a couple of minutes to jump on, but welcome to today's session, A Complete Guide to Short-Term Respite, or STR in short. Just some quick housekeeping before we get started. Just to let you know that we are recording this session, a follow-up email will be sent in the coming week with a link to the video recording. Instructions for those who wish to add closed captions is in the chat. If you haven't already, please turn off your camera and microphone until the Q&A section at the end. And there's both a Q&A and a chat function. So please list any questions you have in the Q&A and we'll cover off some of those common questions or themes at the end and also provide you with some useful links. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we all meet. I'd like to extend out an acknowledgement and welcome to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people as we recognise the ongoing contribution to land, sea and community. We also pay our respects to their elders, past and present. Today I'm presenting this from the land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. So if you don't know me, my name is Rebecca McLaughlin. I'm better known as Beck, and I am the Relationship Manager for Victoria and Tasmania here at Plan Partners. I'll be your host for today's webinar. I can assure you that I am the least interesting person that will be speaking today, but I'm really looking forward to introducing you to two amazing people that will help guide us through the information on short-term respite. I'd also like to introduce Isabella Hunter and Natasha Isherwood, who will be moderating in the chat. So we have multiple relationship managers in each state ready to support you as providers. So feel free to give a shout out in the chat if you've met one of our Plan Partners team in the community, maybe at an expo or an event, or maybe you've even had a team meeting. So many of the team are on the call today, so there'd be, I'm sure they'll love it if you just say hi. So our agenda for this session is as follows. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction to Plan Partners. Then we'll do an overview of STR. We'll move on to a session with our very own Odie Sebastian. He's one of our brilliant account team leaders. And then we'll hear from Luke Wilson from Paylos. And lastly, we'll have some time for some questions that might come up during the session. So let's get started. So for those of you who don't know us, Plan Partners began in 2017 with just 4 people working in a tiny office in Blacktown, Sydney. Today, we're one of Australia's leading providers of plan management and support coordination, helping thousands of NDIS participants, service providers and support coordinators all over the country every day. We're passionate about not only being a great, reliable plan manager, but also being active in the community, organising events, education sessions and webinars just like this one, aimed at helping participants and providers better understand the ever-changing NDIS landscape. So for many of you who actually do know Plan Partners, you will have noticed a significant change over the past week with the launch of our new colours and fonts on the website and dashboard. And I was having a conversation with an SC yesterday explaining that it wasn't just our marketing team agreeing that blue looks better than green. There's actually been some extensive customer and accessible design research that has prompted this change. So the contrasting colour palette was chosen to make the website more user-friendly, easier to navigate and clearer. And we think, and we've even introduced a new font, which we all think is pretty cool. So it's called Inclusive Sans, and it's the most accessible, friendly font available. So be sure to check out our website and tools to see the new look, but I'll touch on that a little bit later in the session. Okay, so an overview of short-term respite. Let's get into it. Short-term respite is the updated name for the support previously called short-term accommodation, or STA. STR is meant to provide time apart for at least one night for a participant and their informal supports. This provides the opportunity for the participant to be supported by someone else while giving their primary informal supports a short break from their usual caring responsibilities. Many of you would know that this is to reduce carer burnout. Generally, funding is provided for group settings unless there is evidence of a need for individual support due to the disability. It is important to note that STR is not intended for holidays, but for respite. So what is included? Supports to help you do everyday activities like getting ready for the day, cooking, eating and drinking, cleaning and doing chores. These are the supports that primary informal supports would normally give the participant. So standard accommodation refers to clean and comfortable accommodation and includes basic amenities like a bed, bathroom, and the accessibility features that are needed. For example, in a hotel, motel, short stay rental, cabin, cottage, hostel, or respite accommodation. So STR may be funded if it means that the participant's family or informal supports can get a break from their caring duties to be able to support them for longer. The participant receives at least 6 hours of support in a day from their informal supports, who they live with or get drop-in support on a daily basis, or any of the following that may apply for the participant. So the participant receives high intensity supports or complex or specialist behavioural intervention support. Participant lives in an area where an alternate in-home supports aren't widely available and accessible, or the wellbeing and caring capacity of informal supports is at risk, or informal supports have additional caring responsibilities. STR is not funded for longer-term accommodation, as this is a day-to-day living cost that anyone is expected to pay. Accommodation for another reason, for example, waiting for home modifications to be done. A participant who lives alone or receives supported independent living SIL supports. Participants who get more than 18 hours of support in their home each day, regardless of who they live with. So STR is usually funded for up to 28 days per plan year. The funding can be used flexibly, so the participant might use it in a block of up to 14 days at a time, or they might choose to just use one weekend a month, for example. So to claim more than 28 days of STR, NDIA approval is required. So why the change? The NDIS made this change on October 20, 2025, and they state, this new name better reflects the purpose of the support, which is to give participants time apart from their usual care arrangements while their primary informal supports take a short break. This support helps primary informal supports to continue their caring role. So I think this is a great opportunity now to introduce you to one of our accounts team leaders, an internal knowledge expert, Odie Sebastian. So I'll give the team a chance to maybe spotlight Odie, and then I can stop sharing.
Oh gosh, that's a horrible photo of me. Hello everyone. Hope you guys are having a good Thursday. My name is Odie, and I have been with Plant Partners for 3.5 years now. I am the team leader responsible for the STR accommodation and AT space. So my attention is split between those three roles. And basically, I'm so happy to be here and making sure that you guys get a better understanding of what STR is all about. Thanks, Beck.
Thanks so much, Odie. And just so you all know, Odie is one of our accounts team members. He is not probably in front of or the spotlighted very often. So we so appreciate Odie coming on and being part of this webinar today. But he is one of the gurus and he's one of our go-to in the accounts team. So thank you so much, Odie. Okay, so let's get started. So let's start back at the start. So what did STA look like a couple of years ago and beyond?
So we would call it the Wild West back then. As some of you guys who have been in this space for a while now would have seen. NDIS were not as strict on STA back then as they are now, and not regulated as sharply as they are now as well. Participants were using STR to fund interstate family holidays and retreats, going on cruises, going on overseas trips. We've processed a few to Disneyland overseas SST. So that's what it was a couple of years ago back.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Odie. So as a large plan manager, we tend to see trends starting to appear before they make any kind of official announcements. Can you tell us what we started to see at Plan Partners around 2024?
Yeah, 2024 was a big year.
Mhm.
Again, back to the people who were here back then. They introduced the what is and what is not a support in October 2024. In February 2024, they introduced the prepayment integrity team that replaced the audits that we used to have based on the claims that we processed. But what we found was in 2024 that there was more invoices that were being picked up by the prepayment integrity team. So a prepayment integrity team, for those that don't know, is before this, NDIS would pay the claims that was processed, but the prepayment team now holds up invoices to gather more information to supplement the claims that we've processed. So payment is delayed on the NDIS side. So we've claimed it. Excuse me. So we've claimed it on our end. They've held up the payment on their side, and they asked for more information. And this is all to ensure that participants' funding were not made at risk when the claim was processed. This has led to delays and in some cases a refusal of claim.
Yeah, exactly. So what changes has the NDIS made to STR since October 2025?
A lot. As some of you guys would know, a lot has changed. So back before the October 25 changes, STA was primarily used as a flexible support for accommodations, assistance, and activities. Nowadays, they're positioned around giving participants and their formal supports, back to what Beck was saying earlier, time apart to sustain a continuous caring relationship. And the focus is now on respite and not holidays or recreation. Back then, STA could be flexibly used for skill building and short stays to hit their goals, participants' goals. But now they are breaks for informal supports, not for holidays, skill building, or tourism. They must also involve one overnight stay, as Beck was saying earlier. They're still capped at 14 days per stay and up to 28 days a year. There has been cases in our space where we've seen 42 days, that's another common one, or 60 days of STR written in the plan, and we do follow them as they come in the plan by the planner. SA funding included accommodation, personal care, meals, and activities as a package back then, but now they've limited to accommodation, personal care, and support, whereas meals, activities, and transport are explicitly excluded unless they are a part of the center's all-inclusive daily rate, which is what's written in the price guide. STR can occur in the Respite facility, hotel, motel, homestay, or participant's home. With the participant's home part, we just need adequate information to say that, hey, the informal supports are away to get a break, while the participants are more comfortable being at home than being in another place that they were staying. Back then also, they're generally based on informal support needs on how much you can get STR, but now they are stricter. So they would need to receive more than 60 hours of drop-in support or any support or support from informal carers. They have disability-related support needs that require ongoing care. And also, if you receive high-intensity supports or behavioral supports, if you have a BSP, if they're in an aging or have an ill carer, they're in rural isolation, or multiple informal support carrying responsibilities about the multiple kids. But you're also not eligible if you are living independently without drop-in supports, if you're already receiving more than 18 hours of support daily, or if you're using the SEAL supports that's already in the plan, or an individualized living options plan because you're already supported without your informal supports. The next bit's a bit more contentious one here. So STA could be listed back then as a stated support under core, but now they are flexible under the core funding, however, must still meet the necessary and reasonable criteria of the NDIS, and will require evidence that helps sustain informal supports and aligns with your goals or participants' goals, and the funding level determined by the number of informal support hours that it's being replaced from home. Last 2 points. There was a broader flexibility to NDIS funded short stays and experiences, but now they are stricter and looking forward to more value for money and duplication checks of usual supports. And they also must mirror participants' usual support ratios, whether they're shared or individual. And the last bit will be the restrictions that they have now. So no interstate or overseas respite, unless closest suitable option is necessary. For example, if you live outside of Canberra, you're in New South Wales, and your Respite option's in Canberra, we're not going to say you can't do that because it's 10 minutes down the road. The same as when you're on the border of Queensland or Victoria, you want to cross the border to go to your STR support. We do look in those in individual basis. There's also no funding for family members or support workers to travel, but there is funding to make sure that you have support workers where you're going. And lastly, there is no crisis accommodation or using STR to attend medical appointments. There are other options we can do for that. Please speak to our team and we'll be happy to help you out. Hope that helps, Beck.
Brilliant. Thanks, Odie. So when we're out in the field and when we're fielding phone calls as well, we get asked quite a few questions about STR. So we'll just rapid fire them at you now, if that's okay.
Mhm.
So can STR be accessed if it's not written in the plan?
That's a really good question. We get that a lot. So the main answer is yes, they can. But we just need to know why the STR is reasonable and necessary. Back to what I was saying earlier for the participant. And we also need a better understanding of what kind of support needs to be continued from the usual daily support spec.
Okay, cool. And what's the level of evidence that required now to process an STR claim for a participant? So do you want to run through some of those?
Yeah, I can run through some of those. So the main thing is a compliant tax invoice for us to process the claim, a service agreement, or schedule of supports. There's been a lot of misunderstanding about having to have both. Most good service agreements contain them already, all this information. However, you can get either that or a schedule of supports. We need the details of the accommodation, just to ensure that you're not traveling interstate or going on a cruise. We just need to know where you're going to be staying or where the participants are staying. And also, again, a reasonable and necessary statement if STR is not written in the plan.
Yeah, perfect. All right. And what about meals? How are they funded within STR?
Yeah, of course. So the main themes from the NDIS that we found is that meals are not to be charged on top of the STR rate and should be discussed when participants speak to service providers. Not saying that they should be provided by the provider, but the NDIS expects meals to be charged to the participant as they have their personal choices of what they want and can't eat. But again, if you have any questions, please send us an email. We'll be happy to help you out.
Brilliant. And let's talk about activities. How are they included in STR and are they?
Oh, another hot topic. So whilst we don't expect participants to live in their hotel room staring at a wall or maybe stay in bed and watch Netflix all day, that's not our intention. So we expect providers to allow supported activities as the same way as you are a support worker, supporting them in their activities because they need assistance with them through the day. However, here's the caveat. The costs of the activities are expected to be covered by the participant.
Yeah.
This can also change when you have an agreement with the service provider. For example, if they've agreed that they have their own facilities in, Outback Victoria, and they have tools and activities they can do. For example, we have a service provider who has a house that is close to a ski resort, and they have their activities. They can do whatever they need. They have skis, they have snowboards, and they are free to use them. The word is free. Yeah. If there is an added cost, for example, if they needed to pay for like a ski pass, the participant can pay that ski pass cost to go on top. However, the agreement must be made beforehand and not an extra charge on top of the STR cost, the daily cost that is in the plan.
Perfect. Thanks, Addie. So here's a hot topic. So if the plan states 1 to 3 funding for STR, can we process the invoice at 1 to 1 STR?
Yeah, this is probably the hottest topic that has been happening since the big change in October 25. So if you're using STR on a 1-to-1 basis for the whole trip, instead of the 1 to 3 that is placed in the plan, we would need further information or confirmation from the NDIS as the planner, who, just a bit of a background, my son has an NDIS plan, and I've spoken to the planner and what they do. So I've got a bit of a background on how that kind of works, and they've set the plan to suit the needs that was mentioned pre-plan as you prepare for the plan. So we have found alternatives which you guys can use if you believe that the participant needs one-to-one on a sporadical basis.
Mhm.
So there is a line item in the price guide that started with the 01_200. And this is what we use to assist service providers and participants to attend STI on a one-to-one basis without claiming one-to-one as a whole.
Yeah.
So this can be used for transferring from the bed to shower, the shower to the wheelchair. This can also be used when you are doing peg feeding or anything that needed a bit more of a support. It can also be used for behavior related supports. So if they need to have 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 even, when they're outside due to their VSP, they need to have more than one service, a support worker. You can use these sporadically through the days that you're out. Though be mindful though, this line item does get monitored by the NDIS, and the ones who use them, we believe from our internal orders that we get from the NDIS from prepayment, is that they do monitor them and can ask for more questions, whether
Mhm.
it was used correctly in that particular aspect.
Cool. And we've spoken about this before, but is it a good idea for maybe a provider or participant to actually put the SDR quote into our team first so that we can review it?
Yeah, that's actually my last bit that I wanted to say is if you have any questions, please send us an email and we'll be able to get back to you guys as soon as we can. Ask anything you'd like. And if you have any questions or even really funky queries, we see them all the time. And what that does is we have information before the STR has started, and we can ensure that payment can be easily achieved rather than doing the STR, sending us a quote or the invoice saying it's been done, and then the NDIS asks for more questions, and you guys are upset, or service provider or something are upset that it's not getting paid because they asked for more information. Be prepared beforehand, then you get a better result on the other side.
Awesome. Thanks,
Mm.
Odie. So appreciate you jumping in here and just answering a few of those common questions. But if you don't mind hanging around, I'm sure there'll be more questions at the end of the session.
Yeah, for sure. Of course. Thanks for having me,
Great.
guys. I'll see
Thank
you
you.
guys on the Q&A.
Cheers. So now I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite people in this sector, Luke Wilson. So Luke is the founding director of Paylos, and he brings in 14 years of experience in the community services sector. So welcome, Luke. Thank you for taking the time to join us on the webinar today. I'm hoping that the girls can spotlight you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm very, very grateful to be here. And I'm really excited about STI as a topic. So I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. So thank you so much for that.
Champion. Thanks so much. Well, firstly, Luke, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in this sector?
Yeah, so I've as you mentioned, I've been in the community services space for about 14 years, doing a few different roles. But a large portion of my time in this space was as a case manager. So I worked in the child protection space and would be working with young people who were on statutory orders, and they would have statutory involvement from the government. And so a lot of these young people that I supported presented with quite complex needs and complex barriers. So there would be often, family violence, trauma backgrounds, neglect and abuse and stuff like that. And during my time, my role was to work with care teams to support these young people to work towards independent living. We would want to engage them into therapeutic supports. And ultimately, we're looking at when they turn 18 and the orders lapse, that they have the best chance of living independently. So we're looking at getting them, some kind of independent living program, some kind of employment. We want them connected in the community. So that was essentially my background in my role, and I guess some of the conversations that I was a part of, and some of the scenarios that I faced, that's a little bit about my background. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So how was Palos formed and what's the whole idea around Palos?
Yeah, so Paylos essentially came out of two very real examples that I was facing in my time in that role as a case manager. So one of the roles would be sometimes we would have young people that were that would be in a home-based care arrangement, which would be in a foster care home, or they might be in a residential care arrangement, which would be, I guess, similar to SIL for people in their space to be able to paint a picture of that. So it'd be a similar kind of arrangement. And so during that time, anytime there was a placement issue in residential care or in home-based care, if a carer was fatigued or burnt out, or there were safety concerns, as the case manager, I would get a phone call to say that this placement is not sustainable and that we had to look at alternative placement options. And so I very often had a lot of Friday nights when I was meant to finish at 5 that I wasn't finishing until 1 a.m. because I would have to look for an Airbnb, and I would have to engage agency staffing, and I would have to talk to different departments within the government to fund different portions, like who's going to fund the activities, who's going to fund the staffing, who's going to fund the accommodation, who's going to fund the meals. And so I just kind of had to Frankenstein this thing together. And so I guess one thought out of that was, I guess, the need for respite to be provided by a provider that, I guess, specialize in that could say, hey, we have the accommodation, we have the transport, the activities, we have the staffing, it's all organized and packaged up and that kind of stuff. So I guess quite a lot of late nights in my career kind of made it very obvious that if there was a provider that could provide respite as a one-stop shop, that would be really helpful for case managers like me that were facing quite complex situations in our role as a case manager. So that's the first story. The second story that's a little bit sadder is in my role as a case manager, and also in my role as a residential care worker. Unfortunately, there were times that it was necessary for the government to intervene and remove a child from the home, and those aren't nice conversations to have, to let somebody know that they're not going back to the family home and they're either going to foster care's home or they're going into residential care. So that's quite a horrible and difficult space, I guess, to be in. And so acknowledge that it's necessary, especially when you're dealing with children. I just thought we could do this in a much nicer way. So the idea for Paylos kind of came out of two necessities. One, the idea of being a designated respite provider that met a need, but then also it wouldn't take that much effort to make that look fun or to make that a little bit more therapeutic. And so the idea behind it was, if we had to have a horrible conversation when a child couldn't return home, instead of that being seen as a punishment because they were too naughty or they were too difficult or mum's in trouble or whatever it is, if we could frame that in a way of like, oh, you're going on a holiday camp or an adventure camp or something like that, and we could really try to seem like something that they get to do as opposed to something that they have to do. And so that was our origin in the child protection space, and it worked really well for those scenarios that I've mentioned. We then started being contacted by parents who had children that had NDIS plans and asked whether our services could support them. And so I guess that's how that kind of started the conversation. And what we learned about the NDIS space is that there were a lot of similarities in terms of there were families that were carrying quite a lot and having to navigate care teams, and they might have support coordinators or they might have case managers, but they might not. And so there was also quite a need there to be able to provide respite, to be able to support the informal supports and to be able to support those families. And that played a very similar role. And so that's how, I guess, the service that we provided supported both spaces. And my experience in the child protection space was that it was very often that you weren't just supporting somebody that had concerns for safety at home. There might be elements of family violence. There might be also elements of there was a disability involved. And so it was very often that the young people that I was case managing did have NDIS plans, and there were NDIS providers involved in those care teams. And so the service that we provided, I guess, fit well in, I guess, both spaces, because there was quite a lot of overlaps and a lot of similarities in terms of, families were facing really complex situations and needed similar, I guess, supports and similar access to that support. And so I guess, went really well into both spaces. Yeah.
Awesome. So I guess I know you and I have had a lot of conversations over the last couple of years, but as like an STR provider now, what have you seen over the past, especially 18 months, and how have you had to change your whole business because of that?
Yeah, look, I think if there's one thing I'd really love everyone to take, if there's one thing that I guess if there's 2 points I really love everyone to take from I guess from today's talk would be that Respite provides a really, really important service to support families. And given its importance for our community, the top priority needs to be compliance first. And so with those two things in mind, one of the things that we started to notice, and Odie mentioned it before about having, when STA didn't have much oversight and it did turn into a little bit of the Wild West, it became quite clear to us that it was quite easy for Paylos to be mistaken for one of these holiday providers, right? And so the reason that we doubled down on our adventure element was purely because we were talking to people who were healing and didn't feel like a punishment. So what was a real positive in one scenario was also a risk for us as a business in another scenario, because we could be mistaken for one of these holiday providers that were doing these Disneyland trips and that kind of stuff. And so that was a really sad reality for us, because something that was intended to be quite positive and do a lot of good could have actually caused us quite a lot of issues in the NDIS space if we were seen as a holiday provider and one of these Wild West kind of providers. And so as I said, I knew that Respite played an important role, and I knew that what we were doing was really important. But I also knew that compliance and making sure that you're within the guidelines was a non-negotiable top priority. And so I had a lot of conversations with different providers, and it was very clear in those conversations which providers really had compliance at the forefront of I guess their mission, or I guess their next steps. Like, it was all kind of guided by compliance. And so I had met quite a lot of different support coordinators and plan managers at a few different networking events. But I guess what got me and you talking and Natasha talking quite a lot was that I started to pick up on, I can't really identify it specifically, but just there was just little things that you guys would say that would you guys would reference your compliance team. You guys would reference I guess trends that you were seeing with invoices, and the conversation on how you guys were talking about, I guess, the legislation and guidelines. It was very clear to me that this was a big topic for plan partners in the background. And so I guess part of my journey was wanting to connect with as many people as possible to say, hey, I know the travel protection space really well. I definitely know the NDA space well from my experience in it. But my 14 years wasn't specifically in NDAs. My 14 years was in the travel protection space. And I wanted to connect with people that knew that legislation and those policies super, super well. So I asked a few people who would be willing to meet, and it unfortunately wasn't as easy, but I'm very grateful that plan partners made time for me. And so our team, our finance team and our management team got to meet with the plan partners compliance team, and we got to kind of like go through all of our questions and say, hey, this makes super sense to me in the child protection space, and I know that's compliant there. Does this transfer over here really well? And I got to go through all of, I guess, our line items and how we charge and our programs and the activities and our itineraries and how we do things. And I guess in the child protection space, it was very easy to understand, I guess, those policies. I guess in the NDA space, something that we had to be very mindful of was the marketing element and how the ACCC is looking at providers around what you guys are offering, and are you misleading consumers to say that the NDIS offers something that it doesn't, and that kind of stuff. And so that was a new consideration, and where we found lots of help from the compliance team with plan partners to be able to say, hey, this is what we're wanting to do, but these are new considerations that we're not sure of that we have to consider. Can you help us to that? And so that's essentially what our journey was, to kind of to prioritize compliance and to meet with people, and yeah, we for plan partners to be nationwide and have those resources, to have a whole team on compliance. It was really amazing to be able to like tap into that resource and say, hey, this is what we're wanting to do. Can you help us to make sure that we're on the the service that we're providing are on the approved list and not on the unapproved list, and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's one of the things that we really want to get across today is that we are guided by the NDIA and what their requirements are of us. And so we all have to toe the line and stay, compliant with the requests of the NDIA. So we can pass on that knowledge to providers. It helps them to, do better in business as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I guess the main point was that yeah, we knew that that respite was a relevant service, and we knew how crucial it was, but it was just super important that we'll clear within those guidelines. So I think for us, what was interesting was that we had to do a whole new marketing, I guess, revamp as a business. And I've said this to people before, we never considered marketing before because we only ever had to convince, a participant or a young person at a time to say, hey, we're going to do this fun camp together. So that's the only time that we really thought about how we were perceived. And so this process of how the NDIS was changing, it made us start to consider other things. And so I guess through the conversations with plan partners, they were able to see trends of invoices and the questions that were being asked from the NDIS that we could then kind of see the direction they were going in. I think what was helpful about that practice is that it really gave us, I guess, confidence in knowing that, yeah, the direction that we're going in wasn't going to be away from the need of respite, which is really reassuring for us. That respite was still a priority. It was going away from, I guess, the holiday element, and that was something that I was hoping for. But I guess the conversation with the compliance team kind of confirmed that the conversation that you guys were having, or the pushback that you guys were getting, or the inquiries that you guys were getting, was also supporting that idea. So when they had the changes in 2024 in October, and then they had it again in 2025 in October, it was all consistent with that. And I think what was great was those changes. It's almost like we spoke about that, I guess, before that came out, because it kind of felt like it was going that direction. So when that was released, it was like, oh, cool. It confirmed that we're really on the money in terms of like, yeah, respite is still being preserved as an important service, but we do need to have better oversight because it was being distorted in many ways. And so I guess one of the things that we did was that we changed our slogan. So you can probably see if my thing is more than just adventure. So we changed our slogan because we still we're trying to find a way to toe the line between not looking clinical, purely because in our scenarios for some of the young people that we support, it wasn't helpful to look clinical. We had to kind of look like fun, but we then also had to toe the line between we couldn't look like we were too much fun, that we were a registered provider that was providing relevant service. And so the slogan got changed to more than just a venture, to open up the conversation around, well, what's behind it? And that's where we got to talk about our services and our capacity building and all the important stuff that we do in the work that we're doing. So that was, I guess, the biggest change that we had to make as a business, but we did that through connecting with people who were prioritizing compliance. And then those conversations really helped to inform us on how we needed to, I guess, position ourselves. And so I guess essentially for us is that we didn't have to change much of our service because the core of it was there. And we just had to, I guess, re-examine the way that we were presented to make sure that was very, very clear. And that allowed us to continue to provide respite ongoing, which I think is the main, I guess, takeaway from this, is that because 2 years prior to that, we were able to connect with plan partners and ask those questions. It gave us the information that we needed to make the necessary changes that we need to make, so that after all of those changes were made, we're still able to continue to provide respite and be confident to be able to say, yeah, we're within the guidelines, and we're confident with that when we submit an invoice that we know that we can provide the documentation that might be requested of us and stuff like that. Yeah.
Brilliant. And so I know we've spoken about a few of your participants and some of the outcomes that they've achieved, but do you want to give us a bit of a story about maybe a really great STR experience?
Yeah. So we have one participant in particular that I'd love to share their the identified story, but that living in the family home, and they did present with quite complex behaviors, and there was elements of family violence, and there was family violence services involved. And for this particular family, respite was super important because respite was used to essentially provide the respite for the informal carers that were doing such an important but very tricky space to be in when you're supporting a child and there are family violence elements involved. And so working with the care team, working with services like Orange Door, we're able to use the respite in very crucial moments to coordinate care teams and to provide services that were relevant. And so had it not been for respite, there would have been high risk of homelessness for this particular person, and then high risk of like entering custody, and that would have been quite disruptive for that person's trajectory and their journey towards capacity building, independent living. And so I'm very grateful that we didn't go on that trajectory. This particular participant that I'm thinking of has been on maybe 5 or 6 of our respites. We've been able to do. We started off doing one-to-one respites because that was what was needed at the time, but we've been able to work with them to get towards group respites. And now, so when we first worked with them, we were maybe supporting them 3 or 4 days a week in the community, and then also doing respites. Now, I think we support them maybe once a fortnight, and they're still living at home. They're working. And so I guess the main takeaway from that story is that respite provided a very crucial service at a very crucial time, but it wasn't something that we were using forever. It was something that we're able to use along with the other supports and the core supports that we're able to use in the community. But we've been able to then provide that strategically in collaboration with the care team. And I think one of the things that STR sometimes gets mistaken for is that we only see the participant for that week or those 5 days. But if you understand that it plays a really crucial role in the broader goals of the care team, if you understand that role that it plays, that can really change the way that you deliver the STR. And so the STR was delivered in a way that we're thinking about the bigger picture. To fast forward 2 years, we only see that person now once a fortnight, as opposed to 4 days a week and regular respites. And so the respite played a crucial role, being mindful of the needs of the person and the care team members that we need to engage, because we're able to, coordinate with the OTs and the BSPs and that kind of stuff. We're able to coordinate all that kind of stuff. And that all played a part in them sustaining that placement, the informal supports getting the respite that they needed to be able to preserve that placement. We're still mindful of their safety and the complexities in that, but we're able to support in a way that allowed that placement to be sustainable. And then we've been able to then drop off those supports as that participant has now gained employment and now is working. And I truly believe that respite played a really crucial role in that. And had it not been for respite being available for that particular person, I think we would have seen a very different trajectory for that particular participant. So I think that's a really good outcome, that now we only support them once a fortnight, and that most of the time they can do really well in the community with their employment and in their family home.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story, because I love hearing how respite can be used in that way, and not just looked at, a break from their carers, but looking at it holistically and like in a larger picture of what can actually be achieved utilizing the respite. So I love that, Luke. Thank you so much. If you don't mind hanging around, that would be awesome, just in case there's a few questions for you as well. I'm just going to start sharing my screen again so that people can see where we're at. Thanks so much, Luke. Cheers. All right. Hopefully we're back on the presentation now. Okay, so moving on from our incredible presenters. Thanks so much, Odie and Luke. But as I mentioned earlier in the session, we've updated our website, tools and dashboard to reflect our new brand vision. So our Price Guide Navigator and Budget Calculator are known as two of the best free online tools in this sector. So the Price Guide Navigator is affectionately known as Google for the price guide, and our Budget Calculator can help you put together budgets within minutes. So you can find both of those on our website at planpartners.com.au. Now, if you'd like any more information about SGR, or you'd like one of our team to come and walk through a more in-depth demonstration of our dashboard and tools, then please reach out to the relevant state manager in your state. They're on the screen now, and they'll connect you with one of our relationship managers like myself. But now it's over to you. I did see some questions popping up there, so we'll open up the call to our moderators, who will select some of the most common questions that have come through on the Q&A chat. So Tash, Val, if you want to unmute yourselves.
Odie, we might just clarify. Andrew's just put a question in the chat, just in regards to STR and what is available. So the NDIS website states 6 hours a day. Can you just clarify that again?
Yeah, that's correct. Excuse me. So the minimum supports that you need to be receiving daily is 6 hours or more. However, there is a stipulation that you are not also receiving more than 18 hours of support, in which case your informal supports are not providing the 6 hours of support that it needs. So if you get supported 18 plus hours per day, so that can happen when you have BSP, or you have support issues, or you're in the SIL environment or an ILO environment. So that would be the answer to that question, Tash.
Thank you.
There's quite a few questions coming through, so I'm not sure we'll have time to get to every single one of them, but what we will do after this is just collate a lot of them and put together a bit of that information sheet for you guys to come out along with the recording. But this is just for Odie, just in terms of some of the ratios, if you don't mind going over. So if the plan doesn't state any ratio for short-term respite, can we process the 1-to-1? And then following on from that, can we actually process anything outside of what's been specifically funded? So could we do 1-to-2 supports if it's been funded for 1-to-3? So just a couple of parts in that question.
Yeah, of course. Good question. So if it is not stipulated in the plan, and I think that's a question earlier about what is stated and what is not stated. I just answer that first. So when we process an invoice above a stated line, which is above 1-to-3 or 1-to-2 or 1-to-4, there has been cases where it has been picked up by the prepayment integrity team, and they ask the questions, why did we process this invoice above? And at the time, we found that that was reasonable enough and necessarily enough that the participant will need more support. And they have provided feedback that we are to stay within the guided, I guess, the guided stated, I'd say guided because stated is a big word, the guided planner that has made the plan. But there's also circumstances where we have processed the invoice at 1-to-1 instead of 1-to-3, and it wasn't picked up by the NDIS. So it is a case by case basis. So if you have a question, please just send us an email. I'm better off you guys getting the answers first before going to the STR, and then having that issue on the other end where the NDIS picks it up and asks for more questions down the track. Secondly, when you are trying to claim above the stated ratio, the guided ratio, I should say, is I would try and use the 01200 line item first in the case that you need 1-to-1 support over the 1-to-3 or 1-to-2 or 1-to-4, over upgrading the whole trip as a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 or a higher support. However, we do take into note that if it is reasonable and necessary and there is enough information, we can process the claim, and then the NDIS will let us know what to do with that claim afterwards. Bella?
Thanks, Odie. I guess that sort of answers another question that was in there just about some older plans. So as an example, there was one that said if the NDIS plan is sort of prior to that October 2024, and we can see that it's been rolled over and rolled over, yeah, can it still sort of be used as that STA? But from what you're saying, you know, I'd still suggest sending in a quote so that our team can review the plan, see what's been funded. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Perfect. Couple about transport as well that's come through, and I'm just trying to sort of collate a few things.
Yeah, of course.
One of them was, how can you get the transport covered to and from the accommodation?
Really good question, because the theme around that with the NDIS is that participants are made to pay for the transport on the way there and back. However, we do have information from multiple sources like plan nominees, support coordinators to say that, hey, the participants can't take public transport, they don't have family available to take them. And there has been cases where we are able to charge a supported cost. So if you are normally needing support when you're going out, for example, let's say they get picked up from home to go to the shops because that's their normal daily activity of going to the shops, transported by the support worker. There has been cases where we have approved that, and it is reasonable, and I think it's also necessary as well because of certain scenarios. However, they can't clash with the STR. So for an example, if the STR starts at 12 on, let's say today, the 12th of March, the invoice for the travel needs to show that they travel from 9 o'clock, for example, or 10 o'clock, and it ends on 12 o'clock. And they can't charge anything above that time outside of the STR. And that also goes back to my earlier discussion about the, I guess, the detail that we need for STR invoices to be a bit more than just, yeah, they're with us all day these days. And then suddenly there's an invoice for a duplicate support by another support worker because they're also claiming for that day. The more information we have, the less questions you'll be asked. Because just because they get picked up by the prepayment doesn't mean they won't go through. The ones that have the most information actually go through quite easily because we have the information. But the ones that don't provide it can cause that delay moving forward. Not frozen? Nope.
Did just for a second.
Just for a
I
second.
think we
yeah.
all froze for a bit there, Odie.
Sorry. It's probably like, I don't know.
You're
I live by the
fine.
beach, so the winds probably pick up the internet. It happens quite a lot. So sorry. Did I miss something?
No, all good.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Odie. I know that this one comes up a little bit, particularly when participants are thinking about how they can reduce their funding. So can STR be accessed to save costs if the client finds their own private respite or accommodation and uses their own support worker?
Yeah, of course. If you already control the accommodation portion, why do you have to claim STR? Why don't you just claim support worker hours only? And you can limit yourself on what they can claim to the hourly rate. And if you only need support, then it's just you living in another house. That's probably my point of view in regards to that.
Yeah. There's been a couple of questions in the chat just around crisis and crisis accommodation. So how do we manage that? How do we view that?
Yeah, good question. So there's a dedicated crisis line with the NDIS that you can call. I can put in the link, but if you look up on Google STR guidelines, it's an NDIS page on it. And there is a specifics on crisis accommodation and how they can, I guess, provide support for your participants. And the ones that we've seen is they can have MTA, which is midterm accommodation. So they provide costings in an alternate accommodation for a certain amount of time. We see that quite a lot actually when, for example, they get in their house ripped apart because their bathroom needs, to be made more safer for them to use, and they're MTA for 90 days at a time because the bathroom takes 90 days to do. But the NDIS can provide that support as long as you request it correctly with the required documentations of what you need and obviously the situation at hand. But again, if you have any questions, call us, or if not, call the NDIS directly and say, hey, this is a situation. I'm supporting this participant. I'm their FC. They're going through a crisis. What can we do?
Yeah. And we've probably got time for 2 more questions. So, Odie, what if a participant or the family wanted to use their 28 days in one go? What's the process for them?
You would need NDI approval for that. And we have seen cases where there has been a use of 28 days. This particular one that I'm thinking of was in a still environment. It was how the NDIS wanted it in that particular time. It does differ. There are some that don't do that, and the NDIS provided other ways of claiming, but it is usually 99% of the time directed by the NDIS in that regard.
Okay. And we might finish off just with one question for you, Luke, just so you don't feel too lonely over there. I just have to locate it again. But I believe it was just in regards to, I guess we've spoken about STR having to be local. So how do you actually manage that with participants if they do live quite a distance away?
Oh, I actually, I would love to answer this question, but I am worried about getting it wrong. I think I'd rather already answer that question just around the compliance side of things. I don't want to get that one wrong, but I don't know if there's another question I can. I'm happy to answer it, but I do think from a compliance thing, I would rather handle it with him. But if there's something else that I could answer, I'm not sure if that's possible.
Well, I would say
Oh.
that majority of your participants are within Victoria, correct?
Oh, apologies. Yes, sorry. Yes,
So
yes.
it's not
all of our
interstate.
sorry,
We are
apologies.
talking
Yes.
about local participants within Victoria
Apologies.
and
Yes, yes. So
only
we do.
a couple of hours
Yes.
from Melbourne. Is that right?
Yes, apologies for that. Yes, yes. Sorry. We
Yeah.
do have multiple STR. So we have one in Metro Melbourne, and we have one out Gippsland Way. So we do, yeah, all of our participants will be Victoria based, and we will support them either in the metropolitan area or yeah, have the choice of our two properties there, and we can support them. Yeah, apologies. Sorry, I think I misunderstood the question. As soon as I got to compliance, I was like,
Yeah.
I'm happy to go, but I just wanted to let
And we know
everybody
compliance is important. So
Very, very important.
awesome.
Tash, I just want to cover two things, if that's possible, that I found personally in the Q&A. One is about meals, and those questions about pre-prepared meals or whether they are covered by the support provider, if that's the word. So our views on that is, so the NDIS expects that you pay for your own meals because it is an everyday cost. However, if the provider that is providing the support or the participant has agreed with the provider that they will provide the meals and the cost does not come as an added cost, we believe that it's okay. We haven't been kind of pulled back on that kind of things as long as the value is agreed on when they are signing the service agreement. Again, there was a question earlier how service agreements and schedule supports are not mandatory. I believe they're very important in getting the invoices across the line with the least amount of issues possible. And yes, if it's not mandatory, we do ask them because we want to know exactly what's going on. So the NDIS asks us, it's better for you guys to get a cleaner claims process rather than a more rugged, more questions here, more questions there, and then you're getting paid later, you're getting paid delayed, or you're not getting paid at all, if that makes sense. So I just want to cover that because there's a few questions about that earlier in the Q&A. So I hope that answers some questions for people. And the other one was the interstate one. If you live on the border of the states, as I was saying earlier, I think I did cover this earlier. So people in ACT or Queensland who are living in the borders and travel across the borders quite often, it is reasonable and necessary that you have the choice of providers, and you are more than welcome to use the providers across the ditch. However, if you are on, say, you're on the border of Queensland and you travel to Sydney, that's interstate. But if you're on the border of Queensland and you just go across the border to a farm down to the southwest of there, that's perfectly fine. If you're in Canberra and you want to go to an SCR Respite just outside of the border, that's also fine. It's just the ones that we've seen where you live in Sydney and you go to Queensland, or you go to Byron Bay, or you live in Byron Bay and then you want to go to Melbourne, or you want to go to WA. Those are the ones that the NDIS targets, and that's what they expect. And I think it's reasonable for them to expect that that's not covered under STR. So just want to cover those two bases because I think they're very important and they have been asked in the Q&A. So yeah, anything else that we've missed, I guess, to you, Tash. We'll talk about that later.
Absolutely. So just before I hand back to Beck, I will mention that I know that there is a few more questions for you, Luke, in the Q&A today. They're probably a little bit more granular detail. So Bella has actually popped Luke's details into the chat. So please feel free to reach out to him directly. But the main takeout for today is if you are unsure about STA and what the requirements are, please send through a quote to us first, and it's probably the safest way to move forward. Beck?
Thanks, guys. All right, so like as Tash was just saying, if you've got any specific questions that you want to talk through with the team, please reach out to a team member, or you can contact us on the following channels. You can call us on our 1300 number, use the live chat directly from our website, or you can email us at info@planpartners.com.au. So that concludes the webinar. I'd like to thank everyone who joined and to those who participated in our Q&A session. Obviously, thank you to Luke and Odie as well. If you enjoyed this webinar, please use the QR code on the screen right now and leave a Google review for us. It would so be greatly appreciated. And for those who are interested in attending any future webinars or events, please subscribe to Plan Partners on Eventbrite. So in the coming week, we'll be sending out a link to the recording of the webinar, so feel free to share it with your team. And thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.